All right, lesson planning considerations. Um, the setting for the classroom that these lessons will take place is the same one for Notice Your Neighbor, summer school, classroom style with mainly targeted students. Also in the classroom were SLD and EBD students, mainly Hispanic background. The curriculum that I used for this setting was um, persuasion writing, and I got some ideas from the Read, Write, and Think website. The Common Core standard that it related to was language arts, and many of the parts of language arts standards it aligned with in this these lessons. And I also targeted the EBD students' IEP goal of will increase his writing skills from a level of writing incompetent run-on sentences to writing a paragraph format with a topic sentence, at least 3 detailed sentences and a concluding sentence. We would work up towards that. Um, the behavior management plan I will use is the same that I used for the Noticing Your Neighbor. I will relate back to that since they already know it, and that's being respectful um, to the classmates and that we are a learning community. We all learn from each other. If you're, I just set some simple guidelines. If you're bothering students, there will be consequences. I will address it. And then just wanting to create a caring and safe environment for the students. Special circumstances that I have planned for. I, did a lot of observations in my Noticing the Neighbor lessons and being in the classroom prior to this. I will group the students differently than what I did after getting to know them. I'll group them with differing levels, like the higher achievers mixed in with the lower achievers. I will also, I wanted to use some collaborative peer groups because I read in the student's IEP that he does well with small group and reading, and I also included in my lessons um, some lessons on that will spark the student's interests. Because I read in the IEP that he will shut down if he's not interested in what the content is. So I tried to get that knowledge or learn prior to these lessons what some of his interests are. So um, to collect baseline data, I actually did some of this during the Noticing Your Neighbor and Learning Communities by some of the writing samples we used during that. And the student had to write sentences. I'll later talk about the objectives for my measurable goal, but it starts out with just being able to kind of collect data on his sentence writing samples from that lesson. So I will plan to continue to gather the writing samples from this lesson when I teach it. Again, grouping decisions that I were based on the data. Again, I decided to put in my lessons, I planned for putting the higher level achieving students with the lower achieving students and separating. I will separate, several of the EBD student and some of the learning LD students and put them amongst the other students. I plan to maybe ask them or specifically find a way to ask the EBD student, if he could handle working with certain students. That way he's part of the decision. The subject area that I am focusing on for this lesson is language arts and writing. The learning segment topic is persuasion strategies, writing essays, as I'll relate that to the whole class, and then I'll modify for the student on the IEP. The modification will be to write a paragraph as related to his measurable goal. Again, I already mentioned the Common Core standard being language arts and actually relating to several of the standards within there. For example, making informed judgments about messages promoted in mass media. And then also the targeted IEP goals and objectives that I focused on in my lesson plans were, as I mentioned before, the student will improve his writing skills from writing complete sentences to writing a paragraph format. The measurable learning segment goal, I'll break it down to starting off with just having him write sentences throughout the lessons. I have prepared for different small group activities where he'll have to write sentences and then later formulate it into a paragraph with the help of some of the tools I will use, like the persuasion map. My summative assessment, I plan on going from, some of the writing samples that I used in the Noticing Your Neighbor, and then I'll use, after the lessons, I'll use the sentences he formulated with these lessons and his final assignment of writing a paragraph. The lesson 1 measurable objective, given a prompt, student will write at least 2 detailed complete sentences with correct capitalization, punctuation, and grammar 90% of the time. I plan to assess this using the written sentences. The lesson 2 measurable objective, I plan to give a topic to write about and a graphic organizer. The student will write a topic sentence with at least 3 detailed sentences and a concluding sentence with 90% accuracy. And I came up with the percentage using the baseline data. The lesson 3 measurable objective will be given a topic to write about and a graphic organizer. The student will write the persuasive essay. And I plan to assess that by using teacher rubric for persuasion essays that I will share with them, writing samples throughout the lessons. I'll use those to measure this as well. 9, describe how I sequence the lessons. So I really use scaffolding throughout I planned for in all 3 of the lessons. I will plan for gaining their attention in lesson 1, where I'm really going to try and explicit the word persuade. And then I will link it to their prior knowledge. So I plan for using PowerPoint with examples that I think that students of that age would relate to for giving examples of persuasion. I have planned to then sequence, from prior knowledge, then I'll give them the tools such as a graphic organizer, and then we'll do some modeling the I do, we do, you do through all the lessons. They're all laid out in my lesson plans clearly that way. We're going to do after gaining their attention with the activity, and then we're going to I'm going to read a persuasion article after explaining the types of persuasion and pointing them out. And then they're going to actually do a little game. And we're going to read an article together, like I said, on marine mammals. And then I'm going to plan for them to do the persuasion map with me. And then I'll pick another persuasion article that they'll do in small group work. And then in the end, I will follow with the last lesson being the you do. They will all read an article and then they will do their own persuasion map and write their own essay in order to assess all the students and then the IEP, the student on the IEP. So expressive and receptive communication skills that the students will need for this lesson is to be able for expressive communication, they will be able to use. I have in my lesson plans that they will um, see the word on the PowerPoint for the type of strategy for persuasion writing, and then have to be able to uh, recall it again later and throughout all the lessons. Um, and for receptive communication, they will have to be able to understand the language or the strategies, um, and they will also have to be able to follow directions. They don't really have to, in parts of the lessons, they don't have to necessarily recall the words. I'll given them the knowledge of the words, and then they'll have to use the PowerPoint slides to refer to different strategies throughout the lesson. How I will support the students in the use of receptive is I will provide visuals, and I will give them the skills for writing sentences and essays. Expressive, I plan on reviewing the visuals before each lesson, and I hope that will help with their expressive communication skill. How I will assess this, I guess I've planned for kind of observing on a tracking sheet, specifically the IEP student, but the rest of the students for receptive language, if they follow the directions in the small groups. I have a lot of feedback or question and answer during whole group instruction. And then for expressive, I have a plan for assessing or thought out that I will assess this through their writing, through their small group work, through the worksheets, their presentations to the class, and then the way that I'll collect data on this skill is through a data collection sheet on correct punctuation, beginnings, capitalization, and subject to verb agreement. I will take their writing samples from each of the worksheets, the small group work, and come up with a number on how well they are using not only the writing skill, but gaining knowledge of the content of persuasive writing. How will you connect new learning to prior learning? I think I plan for, like I said before, I plan for a lot of topics that I've chosen that students of that age can relate to, that will be excited about. So I'm hoping they're interested in animals and candy and things like that. So, and then also I have in my lessons where they will come up with examples of how they've been persuaded. One academic or behavioral self-directed learning strategy I'm planning. I will use from my previous lessons, the noticing your neighbor, that specifically the EBD student, I will use pre-corrects and throughout the lesson. And this is kind of directed toward his behavior. So I want to set him up for success by giving him the expectations, brief reminders of desired behaviors. And then also I just want to, I think my lesson really plans for its independent success and self-determination. So giving the students the skills they need to write on their own.